Apparently I was a little missed. We're 1 week out from the President's first foreign trip, so I wanted to make sure as we prepare for that trip that I bring up our National Security Advisor, General McMaster, to give you a preview of what the team has been doing to prepare for the President's trip. Our goal is to kind of start that process now, and then next week bring the General back and give you a more detailed update as to what the President's going to be doing in each of the areas and some of the highlights from the trip. We'll obviously additionally have background briefings for you as well to give the team that's going to be traveling from the press corps some logistical updates. So without further ado, General McMaster.
Will you take questions after him, Sean?
Yes, Jeff, I will be glad to take your question. In fact, if you'd like, you get to go first today.
Hey, thank you, Sean. Good afternoon and happy Mother's Day weekend, everybody. As you all know, in exactly 1 week, the President will embark on his first trip abroad since taking office. Today, I'd like to explain the President's objectives for his visits to the Middle East and to Europe, and also preview a bit of the schedule. The trip has 3 core purposes. First, to reaffirm America's global leadership. Second, to continue building key relationships with world leaders. And third, to broadcast a message of unity to America's friends and to the faithful of three of the world's greatest religions. The President prioritizes building strong relationships, as you see here, every day with world leaders as a way to strengthen our alliances. And he's been successful. You can see that in his diplomacy with a range of leaders, from Prime Minister May to President Xi. President Trump understands that America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, prioritizing American interests means strengthening alliances and partnerships that help us extend our influence and improve the security of the American people. This trip is truly historic. No president has ever visited the homelands and holy sites of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths all on one trip. And what President Trump is seeking is to unite peoples of all faiths around a common vision of peace, progress, and prosperity. He will bring a message of tolerance and of hope to billions, including to millions of Americans who profess these faiths. The President will focus on what unites us. The President's trip will begin in Saudi Arabia, home to the 2 holiest sites in Islam. He will encourage our Arab and Muslim partners to take bold, new steps to promote peace and to confront those from ISIS to Al-Qaeda to Iran to the Assad regime who perpetuate chaos and violence that has inflicted so much suffering throughout the Muslim world and beyond. He will lead the first steps toward a stronger, more capable, and more robust security partnership with our Gulf, Arab, and Muslim partners. And he will develop a strong, respectful message that the United States and the entire civilized world expects our Muslim allies to take a strong stand against radical Islamist ideology, an ideology that uses a perverted interpretation of religion to justify crimes against all humanity. He will call for Muslim leaders to promote a peaceful vision of Islam. The President will then travel to Israel. With President Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu, he will reaffirm America's unshakable bond to the Jewish state. With President Abbas, he will express his desire for dignity and self-determination for the Palestinians. And to leaders and peoples alike across the entire trip, he will demonstrate his hopes for just and lasting peace. In Rome, the President will be honored to accept an audience with Pope Francis. He looks forward to paying his respects and to discussing religious freedom, ways to combat religious persecution, human trafficking, and cooperating on humanitarian missions across the globe. He will also pay his respects to the Italian people by meeting with President Mattarella, the head of state and one of America's most important treaty allies and trading partners. He'll also see again Prime Minister Gentiloni, who is hosting the G7 conference in Sicily. From Rome, the President will continue to Brussels for the NATO leaders meeting. There he will reaffirm America's commitment to the alliance, while stressing the need for members to pay their fair share, to shoulder responsibility, to share burdens, and for the institution to continue on the path of strengthening the alliance. President Trump will end his trip in Sicily for the G7 meeting in Taormina, where he will promote American economic leadership and also address unfair trade practices. He will remind our friends and partners that we are eager to explore further ways to address threats to our mutual security, from North Korea to Afghanistan to the broader Middle East. Before leaving, the President will visit Naval Air Station Sigonella, where he will thank our wonderful and courageous servicemen and women, allied personnel and family members for their sacrifices to keep us safe. And across the trip, he will meet our diplomats, the staff in our embassies who represent us so well across the world. Lastly, just a few words on how this all came together. The impetus for this trip came from the President himself, and he has been fully engaged from the beginning, setting objectives, overseeing the planning. The President is receiving regular briefings from his cabinet and from our senior staff here on the national security side and on the economic side as well. Most of the leaders the President will meet on this trip, as you know, he's already met in person or certainly by phone. These relationships are off to a very strong start, and the trip is an opportunity to broaden and deepen those relationships. The administration continues to be in close contact and consultation with Congress, and we're drawing on the expertise across the Senate and the House in preparation for the trip as well. And finally, this really is a team effort. The White House and National Security Council staffs, the National Economic Council, continue to work closely with our Departments of State, Treasury, Defense, and others to fulfill the President's objectives and ensure smooth execution. On behalf of the President, I express the whole administration's thanks for all the hard work it takes to organize a trip of this scope and of this importance. So the President of all of us are looking forward to the journey. And with that, I'll take a couple of questions. Defer to Sean to
General McMaster, how was this president viewed among our Arab allies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others, compared to his predecessor?
Well, I'll just say the President's leadership has been welcomed enthusiastically. There was a perception that America had largely disengaged from the Middle East in particular, and that disengagement coincided with this humanitarian and political catastrophe in the region. And so now there's a broad recognition among all of our partners in the region that American leadership is necessary to help address this catastrophe and to begin to move the region toward the peace, security, and stability that the people there so deserve. And so what you're seeing, I think, is a galvanizing effect of the President's leadership in bringing those leaders together across the region and bringing them together for a positive agenda, right? Who's against ending this catastrophe? Who's against confronting these terrorists who are the enemies of all civilized people, confronting Iran, who's participating in this cycle of violence, and to bring prosperity, peace to the region and the people who so richly deserve it. Thanks.
You're somebody who is crucial, obviously, in the intelligence community, somebody who's leading the National Security Council. So I have to ask you, this week in particular, there have been a lot of reports, including from our network, that intelligence officials are extremely concerned about how James Comey was fired. Do you believe that threatens national security right now?
Well, I told Sean that I would pass all those questions to him, and he'll be happy to answer that after this. But what I'd like to do is focus on the trip, and I'll come back next week with more details of the trip as well. Thanks,
John.
You said the impetus for the trip came from the President himself. Was it the President himself who decided to begin this trip in Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam? And is there symbolic significance to that? And how many of our Muslim allies, how many Muslim-majority countries will be represented at the meetings in Saudi Arabia?
Yes. Well, this is the President's initiative to begin the trip in the Middle East, hosted by King Salman and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the King is going to bring together partners from across the region to meet with the president. So the answer to your question is, and I can answer in more detail next week because it's still coming in, sort of the final attendees, but he'll meet with a broad range of leaders in the Middle East. Of course, most of whom he's met already here, or by phone certainly. And we have the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed is coming, for example, on Monday as well.
Steve.
Sean, General McMaster, at the beginning of this very long week, we were hearing speculation that the president was considering thousands more troops for Afghanistan. When he goes to Brussels on Thursday of next week, what is the message to the NATO partners with respect to their commitment in this long fight?
Yeah. Well, the key is that all of us have to be committed, right, to achieving our fundamental objectives in Afghanistan. I mean, Americans know really better than anybody because the mass murder against our own country on September 11, 2001 originated with the terrorist safe haven and support base in Afghanistan. Recently, we have been engaged against ISIS or in ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan with highly successful operations there that you'll hear more about in a press conference at the Department of Defense here in the near future. But what has happened in Afghanistan is the Afghan army is taking the brunt of the fight against these transnational terrorists and the Taliban. And so we're working with our allies to figure out what more we can do to have a more effective strategy in Afghanistan. What are options we can bring to the president to be more effective in meeting our objectives in Afghanistan? And what more can we ask our allies to do, which we're asking them now? So this is going to be really consistent with the president's guidance to us.
Has the president decided that there should be thousands more troops?
The president has not made a decision yet on a course of action. What we have done, which is what we have done in many cases on the North Korea problem set, for example, is we've consulted broadly across our government and with allies. The president wants to hear from our allies as well. This is a president who listens to his allies and partners, who have an opportunity to do so at the NATO summit, who have an opportunity to do so at the G7. And so what we'll have at the end of this next few weeks here is an opportunity for a much more effective strategy for the problem set in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the region broadly.
Jessica.
Thank you, Sean. General, if you could talk first about the evolution from the way the president campaigned, which was a more unilateral foreign policy, to this multilateral engagement that you're emphasizing, and the way that you're rolling out this trip to explain that. And then secondly, if you could also talk about the decision to send a delegation to the One Belt, One Road forum in China and what you hope to get out of that.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
So America First never didn't mean America alone ever. I don't think. And so what we have done is advance the president's agenda in national security by strengthening alliances by burden sharing. Americans don't have to do everything, don't have to bankroll everything, and our allies and partners are grateful for, I think, the president's leadership in asking them to do more. So is an alliance in which each of the members are doing their fair share, who are shouldering the burden, is it stronger or weaker? It's stronger. So the president has done a great deal to strengthen our alliances. And America First didn't mean America not leading. Right? So for America to secure and advance its interests, that requires American leadership. And so the president's leadership has been welcomed in all of the places that he'll be visiting on this trip, and his agenda, I think, that he laid out in the campaign is being operationalized and implemented by his cabinet primarily, with the assistance of our team here in the White House.
Vivian.
Can I just press you on that, General?
Two questions. First, there were reports out of Israel that President Trump may try to get Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas in the same room together while he's there. Is that in fact the case? And also, to NBC News yesterday, the president said that General Mattis and his other generals would be announcing something on ISIS next week. And so, as one of the generals on his administration, can you talk to that? Is there an announcement coming next week?
On the first part, it'll be whatever the president wants to do. So a lot of what we do in the National Security Council is try to keep up with the president. So you may have I think there are plans to
reach out to both of them to get them together.
The final plans aren't set yet. We can comment maybe more about that next week. But it'll obviously be up to the president and those leaders about how he wants to engage with them. But he'll engage with both those leaders there as part of the trip. In terms of the campaign against transnational terrorist organizations and ISIS in particular, the president has asked us to do everything we can to defeat ISIS, and in particular to ensure that we defeat ISIS in this, the so-called caliphate in the terrain that they're endeavoring to hold on to in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other areas. And what the president has also told us is he doesn't want to telegraph what he's doing tactically, day to day. He wants the Department of Defense and our military commanders to be able to execute those campaigns consistent with his guidance, the policy, and the strategy that he's approved. And so what next week will do will be an opportunity for our military leadership to lay out how they are executing the president's guidance, the progress they've made in the campaign, and what remains to be done. And so that's really the emphasis of the press conference next week.
Thank you, General. One more.
Can we hear about Russia and the agreements that were made this week with Russia's top diplomat? I mean, you're going to the region to speak with Arab allies. How are you going to explain agreements you've made with Russia, allied with Iran, in Syria, a place that the president has said is now a priority for him?
I would characterize the engagements with Russian leadership by our Secretary of State, the brief meeting that the president had with Foreign Minister Lavrov, the phone conversations that we've had with Russian leadership as engagements, not decisions or specific approaches. I think what the president has made clear is that he will confront Russian disruptive behavior, such as its support for the murderous Assad regime in Syria. And its enabling of Iran and its very destructive policy and strategy that it's executing across the Middle East, what it's done and continued to do in Ukraine. He'll confront that disruptive behavior, but the president's looking for areas of cooperation. There are a lot of very significant security problem sets across the world. All of them would get easier, right? If Russia were to come to the conclusion that it could best advance its interests through cooperating with the United States and others to resolve those conflicts rather than perpetuate them.
But are they party to those conflicts and causing them in Syria? I mean, the president said at the end of his meeting with Lavrov that it was really good, that there was, he spoke in very positive terms that there was progress made. Are you saying there were no agreements?
The president spoke in positive, affirmative, strong terms in his engagements with Russian leaders.
Thank you very much.
Just follow on my question.
I'll take one more.
Sean, back? Yeah.
Back here, actually. Can you tell us a little bit more about the America First policy, about how it changed over time? Because it's not been very clear what it means and how other people would want to sign up for it.
Well, what it means is that the president is prioritizing the security and interests of the American people. You can see that with what Secretary Ross has done in the economic relationship with China, to look for ways to advance American prosperity. Every theme of this trip is wholly consistent with the president's approach to prioritize the American people, American security, American jobs, American prosperity. And so you'll see that with I think, almost a refreshing, I would say, integration of what we're doing in terms of security partnerships, along with economic relationships, and the diplomatic engagement that the president's cabinet has been engaged with since he's taken over as president, and this trip is going to be a tremendous way to solidify the gains already made and advance them further.
General.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, General McMaster. I'm going to go through a couple updates and schedule before I get to your questions, and Jeff will get the first one. First off, Secretary Ross, I know, was up here last night to tell you about the developments, and General McMaster just noted at the developments that have happened and advances that have happened in trade. The 10 commitments that Secretary Ross announced yesterday are the initial results of the 100-day action plan of the United States-China Comprehensive Economic Dialogue, which began with President Trump and President Xi's meeting in Mar-a-Lago. Under the leadership of Secretaries Ross, Mnuchin, and their Chinese counterparts, the United States has negotiated intensively to reach consensus in areas including agricultural trade, financial services, investment, and energy. One of the actions I want to point out in particular sets the stage for China to allow imports of American beef beginning no later than July 16th of this year. It's been 13 years since our cattle producers have been effectively locked out of the Chinese market. China is the second largest beef importer in the world, buying roughly $2.6 billion of beef every year. In a statement last night, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the nation's largest association of cattle farmers, said, and I quote, "It's impossible to overstate how beneficial this will be for America's cattle producers and how the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit for getting this achieved," end quote. This announcement came on the same day that Secretary Perdue visited a barge loading facility in the Ohio River and announced that he will appoint the first ever Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agriculture Affairs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is further proof of the seriousness of which the administration is approaching the promotion of U.S. agricultural products abroad. And that's just one part of the deal that was reached. Here are some of the other highlights that we have worked with China. 8 pending biotech patents from the United States firms will be evaluated at a meeting of Chinese nationals.